Welcome to Algebra 2, Unit 7, Lesson 8, Practice Problems. This begins the second half of Unit 7, which is the last bit of material that will be covered in this class this year. Our first practice problem says, a tetrahedron is a triangular pyramid with 4 equilateral faces. Han has a box of tetrahedrons with each of the 4 vertices marked with one of the numbers 1, 2, 3, and 4. He rolls one tetrahedron and makes note of the number on the vertex that points up. After rolling this tetrahedron 10 times, he notices that the number 1 appears 5 times. Han suspects that this tetrahedron is weighted in some way to make 1 appear more often than the other numbers. Using another tetrahedron from the box that he has confirmed is fair, meaning all of the numbers tend to be rolled with equal frequency, explain a process Han could use to gather evidence to show whether this tetrahedron is also fair. So what Han wants to do is run a bunch of the same simulations and then compare the results. So Han can roll the fair tetrahedron 10 times and record how many times the number 1 points up. Then repeat this simulation several more times. And record the results when analyzing the results. Determine if the number 1 pointing up 5 out of 10 times is an unusual occurrence. So he rolled the tetrahedron that he's not sure about 10 times, and 5 out of 10 times the number 1 pointed up. He can take the tetrahedron that he has already verified is a fair tetrahedron, and he can do that same experiment of rolling that tetrahedron 10 times. And each time he rolls it 10 times, he records the results. And then he compares all of those trials and he analyzes it to see if it is unusual for the number 1 to point up 5 out of 10 times. If he finds out this is unusual, then it would appear that the first tetrahedron is somehow weighted to get that result. If he analyzes the data and the number 1 pointing up 5 out of 10 times is not unusual, then it would appear that the first tetrahedron is not unfair. If you have any questions about how to answer a practice problem like this, dealing with simulating to find out whether something is fair or unfair, please ask for clarification now so that you are prepared as we move forward to other practice problems. Question number 2. A spinner is divided into 3 equal sections labeled A, B, and C. Number 1. Based on probability, how many times would you expect the spinner to land on C after spinning 30 times? Explain your reasoning. So, because there are 3 sections, we expect C in 1/3 of the spins. 30 times 1/3 equals 10. So we would expect it to land on C about 10 times. Number 2. After spinning the spinner 30 times, the frequency of the outcomes is A 9 times, B 8 times, C 13 times. Is the number of times the spinner landed on C reasonable based on your expectations? Yes. Even though it's not exactly 10 times, it is close, and we expect some variability. And number 3, the spinner is spun 3,000 times. Give an example of a number of spins that result in C that would be possible but unusual. So if we spin it 3,000 times, we would expect it to land on C 1,000 times. So anything that is far away from 1,000 times would be considered unusual. It is possible, but it would be unusual. So something like 2,000 times landing on C would be possible, but unusual. Explain your reasoning. We expect it to land on C approximately 1,000 times. So 1,000, maybe 900 or 1,100. We expect it to be somewhere around 1,000 times. But if we were to see 2,000 times, then that means the other 1,000 times has to get split between A and B. So we might be looking at a huge difference, like 500 for A, 500 for B, and then 4 times that for C. So we expect it to be approximately 1,000 times, but not exactly. We do know that there's going to be some variability. But anything very far away from what you expect would be possible, but unusual. If you have any questions about how to answer these types of practice problems, please ask for clarification now so that you are better prepared as we move on to the last practice problem. Based on classical genetics, two heterozygous parents should pass on the recessive trait to their children 1/4 of the time. A researcher puts 20 fruit flies that are heterozygous in a container, then examines the children. 46 of the 100 children have the recessive trait. Is there reason to believe something is wrong with this experiment? Explain your reasoning. So I want to make sure you understand what they're saying. Heterozygous means opposite. So if you have had biology and you've talked about a Punnett square, when we have parents, they could have a dominant gene and a recessive gene. And in order for the child to get the recessive gene, then they have to get 2 copies of the recessive gene, because the dominant gene will overpower the recessive. So if we have 2 parents, we'll say capital R is, let's use D. We'll say capital D is the dominant gene, and lowercase r is the recessive gene. So if we have D and D, the child would have 2 dominant genes. D and R, the child would have a dominant and a recessive, but the dominant would win out. Again, we would have D and R, so while the child would have a recessive gene, the dominant gene would be the one that would overpower and show through. Only when we had the R times the R would you end up with a child who actually displayed the recessive gene, because they have 2 copies of the recessive gene. So we expect 75% dominant trait and 25% recessive trait. So if we had 100 children, then 75 should have dominant trait, and 25 should have recessive trait. There is reason to believe something is wrong because nearly twice as many children have the recessive trait as we would expect. We know it's not going to be exactly 25 every time, but we would expect it to be close. Maybe it's only 20, maybe it's up to 30. But when you are seeing almost twice as many having the recessive trait as you would expect, then that does give us reason to believe something is wrong with the experiment. It does not prove that there is something wrong, but it does raise some questions, and it would tell us that we might want to conduct the experiment again with a new group of fruit flies and see what kind of results we get the next time. So if you have any questions about anything we went over on Lesson 8 practice problems, please ask for clarification so that you are better prepared when we move on to Lesson 9's practice problems.